Yeah. And
It's
Mark,
it's simply impossible.
Producer Robbie wanted to ask you a question himself, so I'm gonna pop him on the screen here as well.
Morning, Mark.
Is that Putin KGB bot?
It is. This is Putin bot, your favorite bot.
My favorite bot.
Your favorite bot. No, just real quick. I live here in Montana. I love the Spanish reference that Ted made earlier because it's true. Not very many people here speak Spanish. Just real quick, I just want to tell you thank you, because the perception here is that Russia is a dictatorship. If you speak out against Putin, if you criticize anything he's doing, you immediately get sent to Siberia. You start counting trees. You are living proof that is a lie. Thank you for what you're doing. It's yeoman's work.
I do. People who are familiar with me, since the beginning of this conflict or before, will know that I criticize the Russian government all the time when they think they deserve it, just not from a pro-Western liberal perspective, right?
Sure.
I criticize the Russian government for not going into Ukraine right after the West-backed putsch in 2014. And I continued doing that from 2014 up until 2020. And I was still on Russian state media the entire time. And now they all come to me and say, oh, yeah, you were right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's huge because, I mean, the best disrespect, the fact that you're doing this is awesome. Now, my question is kind of a little bit outside the box. Does the American debt factor in at all into Russia's strategy? Russia's obviously, they're taking this slow, going through attrition. Is BRICS and the de-dollarization, the attack on the dollar, is that a part of this? Is Russia looking at the unsustainable debt that the United States has, and is that playing into the strategy just to drag this thing on until there is a sovereign debt crisis?
If you're talking about this conflict, no.
I mean, just how about just in general? Like, is that
in general, right? I mean, I honestly, I think that the Russian government works from a longer term perspective, right, than the U.S. government does, right? They're thinking 5-10 years ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But I don't think that a sovereign debt crisis in the U.S. factors into that 5 to 10 year strategic plan from Russia.
Because
if you're talking the Chinese, who operate on a 50-year time frame, it probably factors into their planning, right? At some point, right? That probably factors in, because they're even longer range thinking than as you know, the Chinese government, for still the Chinese, if you want to call it the Politburo, right? It's not really, but they're still largely engineers, right? Like the highest profession from which, you know, the deciding members of the Chinese Communist Party at the heights of the party. There is a trickle of new professions and everything in, but they're still mostly engineers. Right? I mean, that's where their mentality comes from, and it's rather interesting. Like, if you take a look at the makeup, the mentality, right? All of the British, the leaders of the United Kingdom, or England more particularly to say, come out of Oxbridge, right? I mean, that is the mold, right? There is a education and career path that leads right to, you know, the halls of the British government. In the United States, you kind of have some divergence, but still, it's largely lawyers and more from the Republican side. There's more businessmen. That is kind of an emerging modern phenomenon, I would say, in the last 20 years. But in China and Russia, it's lawyers, but also lawyers who also often have an intelligence background, right? They're not an absolute majority, but they are still a plurality of the most important players of the Russian government. Gotcha. But there's a big push in the wake of this conflict. Putin has pushed it more and more and more. He's saying that the new Russian political and social elite should all be veterans of the special military operation. That should be Russia's political and social elite moving forward, and he's done a lot to encourage that. So you're already seeing veterans of the special military operation in being Duma members, being members of local governments and stuff. That's actually already happening at this point. In China, it's engineers, and it creates different types of leadership mentalities among the modern countries, and that's why the Chinese leaders look further ahead. I think that than a lot of people. But they are also the old, one of the oldest continuous civilizations, of course, and their time frame probably of geostrategic thinking probably includes the idea that U.S. national and not only national. If you take a look, state debt, right? Corporate debt, consumer debt. Right, it probably factors in, but it's still not a short-term phenomenon. And even BRICS, right? BRICS is still much more. I hate to say this because people get upset. BRICS is still largely aspirational, right? It is. Right. There's very little actually, and they're trying to change that, right? They're trying to create a BRICS version of SWIFT. Right now, the only concrete BRICS is often imagined. Okay, first of all, they're not an anti-NATO. They're not an anti-U.S. hegemony organization. That's not what they are, right? And when they include
not a military, it's not a military organization.
They don't even want to be a counter geopolitical bloc to the West, right? Because that's not what Egypt wants. That's not what the UAE wants, right? That is not what Brazil wants. That's not the way they look at the world, right? So BRICS is more than Russia and China, and so there has to be consensus. And yes, they want to create a parallel economic architecture, economic and finance architecture of the world, just because they want to live outside of the U.S. and European control of the existing system like that. But that's from a lot of the countries in BRICS, that's not because they want to destroy. They're just opting out or opting for options to coexist alongside that. And that's important. The U.S. may not, they may just see it, if you're not part of our economic system that we largely control, then you're an enemy, right? Yes, the U.S. may see it that way, but that's not the way that India sees it. That's not the way that Egypt sees it. That's not the way these other countries see it. But the new development bank, the BRICS New Development Bank, is the only concrete piece of that alternate or parallel economic architecture, providing some of the functions of the World Bank and the Economic Forum that are existing under U.S. and European control today. But there are plans to develop more, and an alternate form of international finance messaging, right? An alternate SWIFT system is right now the priority that they are working on. However, this all would have been much easier if they had agreed on this before BRICS expanded. If it had been something that countries bought into by signing on to BRICS, that would be much easier than now convincing everyone, including Egypt and the UAE and now Indonesia and other countries, of all coming to a consensus agreement on this stuff. It would have been much easier before the fact. I'm just saying that. Expansion of an old multilateral organization always dilutes the political impetus of these organizations. It's one of the the nature of the beast.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much for that. So
appreciate you.
If the U.S. attacks Iran, do you think that North Korea would then deploy its vaunted military to save the Iranian revolution?
Absolutely. I can fully expect Netanyahu to be doing videos with captured North Korean soldiers who are not speaking to the camera. Yeah, I can absolutely see that. Right? We live in an almost farcical world of propaganda at this point, right? And the conflict in Palestine, or if you want to call it the larger conflict in the Middle East, is just another example of that propaganda bubble and the difference between that and realities on the ground. And you guys, of course, are as eloquent in exposing that as you are in the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Robbie. I'm gonna move you back into lurking in the chats.
Back to the producer land.
You are dismissed, sir.
Hey, I'm a married man. I'm used to it. Just back to the back.
Thanks, Robbie.
My wife is sitting right there.
Like, hey, you guys.